Hi, this is Nathan Pierce for another episode of REDtalks, and I have a very well-known guest with me this week from the DevOps community, and it's Mac Vittie. Laurie, can you say hello and quickly introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Mac Vittie.
That's all.
That's it.
And that's all we have time for this week.
You know, what does one say? But, right? I mean, Lori, right? With F5, I write stuff, I talk about stuff, and I'm generally annoying. So, there you go.
Ranting, that's the R for REDtalks.
There you go. I forgot my cheese head, but next time I promise I will find it and wear it for one of these talks.
Yeah, I'm still learning. I mean, I'm in California, but I don't really know the geography everywhere yet. Your cheeseheads are Wisconsin?
Wisconsin, yes. Packer fans.
Okay, fantastic. As long as you're not a Seahawks fan, we're good. So, no Niners.
No.
Interesting team to support at the moment. Yeah. But your background, you're the voice of many different circles. But your background, you were actually on the tools, a full-scale developer nerd before getting more into writing. Is that correct?
Yes. I explained it this way at Automacon. So I have actually taken my career through all of the phases of an enterprise. So I started out in dev, and then I went to the magazine where I did testing, right? Testing, QA, and then now I'm in production, right? We're delivering apps. So it kind of works out, right? It's corny, but it works.
And next you get to retire and just be the consumer of the app on the other side and give feedback about it.
Still gonna go off the grid, I swear. I mean, there are days, right? You can't, it's terrible when you can configure a router or, write code that does magical things, but you can't get Outlook to do what you want it to do, right? Or WebEx. It's the most frustrating thing in the world, right? Technology is just so different sometimes. You're like, this should be easy, but it's not.
It's funny. I just did a factory reset on my wireless access point just before joining this call because I couldn't get it to do what I wanted. So that's my default now. Factory reset, start again. Factory
reset, reboot, just start it over. That's right.
You just said that you're at Automacon. I didn't get to go to that one, and it's a fairly new one, isn't it? I haven't come across it before. Tell us a bit about that.
So this was 2.0. So I assume that means it was the second year of doing this conference. It bills itself as the Infrastructure as Code conference. So it was basically filled with a lot of ops people, right, who were really talking about, infrastructure as code, challenges, frustrations, techniques, ideas. A lot of different kind of topics came up. A lot of sadness. I learned about sadness-driven development, which was hilarious. Actually, it was. Let's see. She was from Puppet, Morgan Rhodes from Puppet Labs. So she's one of the release engineers, and her entire talk was about, basically automation gone wrong and how to fix it, and that's sadness-driven development where there's so much sadness and you have to inflict it on everyone, and then you go through and you fix the problems. What I've been finding is really interesting in the netops community and the DevOps community over the last month of talking to customers. I was at a user group and did some speaking, and then Automacon, is there's really kind of this theme of where they're learning kind of everything that we had to learn in development, right? It works on my machine, but it didn't work over there. And the process of testing, regression testing, unit testing, having reset buttons and rollbacks, and how important these things are when you start doing automation and orchestration, right? They've always done scripting. Everybody's got a script that logs into the router and changes something or grabs a stat and pulls it back. But automation and orchestration are new levels. They're writing code, they're trying to figure it out, and realizing they can't just apply the dev part. They have to get all the ickiness, right? The reason I hate developing, right? The testing and the documentation and the code reviews and all that stuff that isn't necessarily fun, but is necessary to ensure quality code goes out and actually runs the business. So that seems to be the theme lately, is they're getting to that point where they've put enough into production and using it to realize how important all those little maintenance things are.
That's interesting. That ickiness of like when you write something though, like when I'm sitting down and we look like we just woke up our little mascot here. She's rolled over. She's frustrated with the noise. This is Bella, the REDtalks mascot, who just sits and watches. So it's easy when I'm sitting in and just writing something in Node.js. It's running against a virtual machine that's on my laptop, so I control the version of the API I'm talking to because I put that product there. I control the network that's been connected to because it's inside my laptop. I can be in airplane mode on a plane and still coding and writing in this environment. Then the second I go and give that to someone and say, hey, take a look at this, and they run it and they say, the whole thing doesn't work. Like how bridging those two gaps, like I don't know what version they're running and whether there was a change in the API for the previous version or what I'm doing. And then I have to be one of those really annoying people that says like I tried to use a website the other day and I was amazed it said it only supported Internet Explorer. The whole site only supported it. And then people put code in that stopped it working if you tried to get to somewhere from Internet Explorer. And like, I'm amazed to see this sometimes, that there are still people who are like, you can only use the little environment that I wrote it in, otherwise it's not for you. I mean, this is the internet. Aren't we meant to be free of all these things? Isn't that this era no, people get to see the shiny outside, but maybe not so much of the torture inside of what if this happens? And have I caught that error condition? And how do I gracefully fail from that error condition versus put one of those wonderful JDBC errors that vomited out on the screen. Like, I mean, there's a topic in itself, gracefully failing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What do you do? I caught the exception. Now what? What do I send back? Right. What do I put in a log? Right. Logging is a lost art. Right. You only turn on logs when you have to catch an error, when something's already gone wrong. You don't constantly log because I/O is too expensive, right? As a developer, you're not going to do that. So you only turn it on when there's an error. Then you have to hope that the error is meaningful. I mean, I used to code really odd sounding error messages just so I could find it in the code later, right? Tweety Bird, that's a real exception that was caught in code that runs in production, I'm told, still today. But they know exactly where it is because they can search through the code and find Tweety Bird. Oh, that's this one. How do you come up with a scheme to do that so that you can easily find these things, right? Numbers don't tell you things. Everybody remembers the weird ones, but you can't do that in a real environment, unfortunately. Not really, right? Sometimes you can get away with it, but it's
at Automacon about how to handle getting people from a software thinking world to work with programmable infrastructure, and to even handle that transition of like, okay, we're going to expose you to some weird level API nuances that you've never seen before because infrastructure is different from the way that you do things. Like, was that much of a topic?
No, I think, you know what, we need to have an entire conference just discussing what infrastructure means. Because when ops people say infrastructure, they really still stop at the network, right? They don't mean anything beyond, the web servers and the app servers and the database servers, maybe some caches, right? I got Varnish, got Memcached. I know how to get all this stuff together. I know how to do continuous integration, continuous delivery, but deployment is still somebody else's problem, right? And so they have to, there's still that gap that exists. It still isn't being bridged. And really, if you think about it, it's incredibly difficult to bridge that gap. Not just the technology exists, but in a production environment, you have things you can't replicate ever, right? I can never be sure, even if I put it on a laptop, that it is the way it's going to be. So you're going to test on a live production network. You're going to debug on all the while stuff is flying by and people are trying to do their work. This is a real, it's a significant challenge. I don't know how to overcome it. I don't have a solution, so I shouldn't be complaining, but I will. What do you do? You can't do it. I can't.
You talk to some people in some circles and they say, what do you mean everyone solved this already? Look at the way Netflix built its simian army that can actually go and destroy itself so that they have to code around problems and make it continuously run. And, well, that's fine if you're that big a company with that many developers. But how many of us have that level of resource on hand that is that familiar with the code and their own distribution, Netflix OSS, that's out there freely available? Like, even the fact that it's on GitHub, that doesn't mean that anyone who did download it would know it well enough to install it and run it in production. And there's a big gap there, and I think there's a lot of assumptions. Like some people understand that, and they're the ones that I think are very vocal about, oh yeah, this has been solved, but not solved for the masses.
Yeah, no, it hasn't, and it's still a different environment. You're not going to let the chaos monkey go and break something randomly in an enterprise production environment and potentially take out 200 applications.
Yeah.
Right? In and out. You can go, oh, well, they're in the cloud. They still have to get out on the network. If you break the network, they can't do their job, out or in. This is, right? It's the same big pipe. That's it. Yeah. Because it isn't the network, it isn't the internet inside. We like to, we have a little internet inside of our data center. No, it doesn't work that way, right? You have one pipe that's going out. If you break it, that's it. So, randomly breaking things doesn't make sense in an environment with 200 apps or 20 apps even that people rely on. Netflix and PayPal and Facebook and a lot of the born in the cloud, the web monsters, have a significant advantage, even when they're that big, and it isn't necessarily the size of their development teams or their resources. It's that they're really responsible for only one application, and they know that application inside and out. An enterprise has 200 applications, and people are dedicated to different types of apps. I might know 2 or 3, but that doesn't mean I know anything about this other application. I can't fix it. I don't know what breaks it. That's a different team, right? It's coordination and it's collaboration, and it's just a way different world. I don't know what will break it. I could, just look the wrong way at the network one day and break it, and it's my fault, right? It
could be extra solar activity in the universe to just break it.
Solar flares, yeah. Where's my BOFH calendar? Solar flares, magnetics. There was an earthquake. Sometimes it felt like that.
Well, I remember talking to an organization, and I'd love to pretend that this was a very abnormal situation, but I think in reality this happens a lot. And this organization said that they were about to migrate an app to a new data center on a new architecture, and they backed out because they realized the DNS system that was pointing it at the load balancer, no one had logged into it in 5 years, and nobody knew the credentials because 3 different people had left since they implemented it. And they were just stuck. They were like, well, we can't move, because the only way to get out of this now is to take that box out, and that box is also running the DNS for several other systems, which means we have to do in one place a migration of all of those systems and just shut this box down. So it was an all in and an all out. I mean, and I'd love to say that I've only heard that story once before, actually quite a few times.
You hear that a lot, right? There's only one person in the company who knows how to do this, right? Yeah. And
these larger web companies you're talking about, they don't suffer from that as much, do they? They don't have that legacy infrastructure.
Right. There's no legacy to deal with. And that was one of the things that was mentioned at Automacon, actually talking about, dealing with some of this. There was some conversation about automating network equipment and the need for expect scripts, right? Screen scraping. Because some of this stuff is so old, so legacy, that there is no API for it. There is no way to access it any other way but an expect script. I expect this back. That's how I'm going to automate it. So they have the challenge there is not only are we trying to integrate 15 different kinds of things in the network, but now we're using different techniques and tools. And so we have to become integrators too. I mean, there's this whole gonna grow into this entire, I guess, new skill set where infrastructure integration, infrastructure automators who are specialized in understanding basically all of the network and understanding how to get that to work together and what kind of errors to throw and what kind of, monkeys to throw in, right? That kind of thing. But they have to get there. So a lot of these guys are learning to do that, but it's a slow process and not everybody likes it because you have to understand networking and coding. And that's a weird combination to get. It's hard to find those people right now.
So I recently had a chat on that same topic, and the question came up was, do DevOps need a super netops? So we've got a traditional netops person who's been working with infrastructure all the time, and now they've got pressure from their leadership to stop putting manual process in the way of releasing software that's going to generate revenue or generate productivity. So you need to start working with these DevOps toolchain operators, and you need to be more aware of their processes and get involved. And the more and more I talk to people like that, they're like, yeah, everybody's in the same boat. They're like, we're all under this same pressure, but we don't know where to start. The gap between even just the conversation language between the two is so huge that I can't help thinking that the job of organizations that are providing infrastructure, it's their job now to enable that traditional NetOps person to become like a super NetOps person who's like, okay, I know all about my infrastructure. I've still got all that experience. But now I know how to do everything I was doing on the CLI and via the GUI. I know how to not be an API expert, but at least I know how to present those resources and its API to my DevOps toolchain operator. I mean, you don't overnight need to be an expert in Node or in Python or those things, but I think they at least need to be really comfortable with presenting services to a third party and understanding the RBAC considerations around doing that and the support and the debugging of doing those things. And we still have this huge gap from like traditional NetOps to DevOps. And I keep thinking there's room for this evolution to like a super NetOps role somewhere there that is far more savvy with the DevOps toolchain world.
Yeah, there is a need for that. And there's a need for just, I mean, moving beyond the simple, here's a GUI. So I was at a user group and was listening to the story of basically how they built some network automation and these tools. They're strictly for other engineers who already understand what they're doing. The GUI is, there's a reason there are UI experts. Let's put it that way, right? So we won't diss them on that. But what they noted is that still, they had very specific requirements, and they expected the people entering the data understand what they're doing. So they don't do a lot of checks and balances. They don't worry about it as much. And they realized that the step from going from that to enabling maybe DevOps guys or app owners or business people to actually do the same thing, which is basically here, start up a load balancer, right? Create this load balancer for me. That leap there, they would have to do a lot of work, right? To nail it down, to make it more, less likely to break. I'm trying to do it right. You don't want to say user-proof, right? It's just trying to user-proof the UI and just make sure. And that's a very difficult process too, because how do you do that? I mean, really, these guys are going through an entire education on doing software development in very rapid succession, because they have to learn how to do the coding and the testing. They're learning about Jira and Eclipse. Did you know Eclipse is an IDE that you can use, right? This is new for this entire group. They don't know that. We take it for granted. They're like, this is cool. You need this. This is awesome. And they're starting to share that, but it's still making that leap. I mean, you're talking about understanding abstraction and encapsulation of process and tasks, as opposed to make this CLI an API, which is really easy. It's one-to-one. You start mapping processes, you get, well, what makes sense? Now you're doing design. Now you're doing architecture. And this is a way different world, right? Because that's software design principles. And a lot of these guys have those skills. Like my brother went through, his degree was in software engineering. He doesn't like it. He likes to do the other stuff, right? He wants to do the networking and the DevOps type stuff and writing those things. So these guys have some of those skills, but they've never actually put them into practice. And then there's ones that haven't, and they have to learn them. So this is not an overnight thing. It's going to take years before we start seeing, you know, anything that's really going to bridge that gap, unless you get guys on the other side to come over and help, right? Collaborate that way. So move right to left, not left to right. You know, meet in the middle, bridge gap. How many analogies can we get, right? Share the cookie.
Don't cross the streams.
Cross the street. Don't cross. Yeah, we need to, right? That's how you win.
That's what actually needs to happen. Well, my favorite example, I keep coming again. So let's say there was some infrastructure that actually did have some great abstraction already. It was using like service templates to make it as easy as possible to present a simple API to people who don't know the infrastructure. So the only bit that's left is things they should know the answer to fill out. But then you get this problem with, okay, we've got these templates that we can use, and all you have to do is post to this REST API resource and put this JSON payload in. Well, okay, so the infrastructure person knows about the infrastructure and the features that are going to be turned on and the things that are inside the template, but why would we expect they know how to properly format JSON templates on the fly for their dev guys? And their dev guys are just to give me the JSON formatting and tell me what goes in what one, and I can code that in and it's all great. There's still this translation problem of, you want what? Like, they both need to have that common language, which is completely missing. We can't expect everyone to just overnight be experts at this common language, and then not just the common language and how that works, but what the impact of some of those things are within it. Like, it might seem trivial to a developer to change a field and just patch that resource, but the consequence of that patch could be much more significant than what they appreciate. So yeah, that gap needs to be filled, definitely.
And it's a big one. They're starting. I mean, that was something I heard in the talk as well, right? The pain of integration, right? We had to integrate with Remedy to do the tickets to actually pull this through, so we knew what to do. And right? This thing is fragile. If it breaks, right? What's your backup plan? And that's something else that we don't think about. If we're going to automate, right, this whole system, you still need to have a backup plan to do it manually. When I worked for a logistics company, I'm an architect. I'm doing IT stuff. I'm writing code. And one day, the core dispatch system goes down. The next thing I know, I'm a runner. I'm taking faxes and taking them to dispatchers on the call center floor, because this is their backup plan, right? I thought I was an architect. No, I'm a runner. Get the sneakers out. But even, there's got to be some fallback. You still have to know how to do these things manually. And that's another challenge, because, right, if we automate things too far, we forget how to do them manually. That's, right? How many people can drive a stick, right? None of my kids could. They nearly blew my car up trying to learn, right? It was nice because they never drive my car, but still frustrating, right? You forget when you go to automatic, it's just, happens for me. You don't know how to do it. So the same thing is true with technology, right? If you automate all these things, you still need to have the process well documented. You need to know that this thing that happens actually requires you to do step A, B, and C, and have that well documented, because if that fails, you can't stop the business, right? Because you're down. It doesn't work that way.
That's really good point you just raised. So the example I gave before, where they couldn't migrate because of the DNS system, well, that was just one single thing that stopped everything moving. What if several systems were automated around that? That could be significantly more technology that if the person who wrote that left. I think that's actually a really good point. Documentation, how that all works, so that someone else can come in and pick up your code. And are we in danger now of maybe having this self-taught era of people who aren't familiar with those practices of, doing the boring bit, the documentation and all of that stuff, so that someone else can pick it up when they leave? Because as soon as you don't do that documentation and it's not clear, then yeah, when someone leaves like that, that's exposing you to far more problems there. So that's actually a really good point. You do have to do that boring part as well, and make sure, like, organizations are going to have like developers are very familiar with having, source repositories with versioning and revisioning and all of those things in place. Infrastructure teams are going to now need to start doing that. I have seen one or two starting, they run their own internal wikis. They've just installed like MediaWiki, and their configuration files are just posted straight into the wiki, and they use diff in the wiki to see what was last changed. And that was amazing. They were doing that before they even started using their REST APIs, but that's going to become so much more important to do it that way, I think, so that you can back out. Backing out should be able to go, okay, get the configuration for the 2 edge routers and the load balancer and this from this timestamp, and they should be able to pull those out of the revisioning and reapply them, and there we go, it works again. So, with infrastructure people, like NetOps will have to start thinking a little bit like developers in the way that they manage configurations. Not just having central management tools, but managing the management tools properly.
Oh yeah, because that's now they're part of, right? Then, at what point do the tools become part of the critical infrastructure? When do they become part of the critical path? Now, and that's a question we have to ask. We said, production is not dev. I mean, this stuff is, right? If Git isn't working one day for the developers, they lose development time, right? If Git is suddenly not working in production, what does that mean, right? That means no changes. What happens, right? Do you still fall back to manual, or do you just sit around and go, well, we don't know? It's going to be interesting to see. And I think these are some of the challenges when people push DevOps on the enterprise. They're not thinking about those kind of issues, that, this is a much more complex system that you're dealing with than, just my cloud app that I put out. Not to, denigrate these guys, because they have done a lot of work. I mean, a lot, and they know a lot of things, and they offer a lot of insights, but they don't seem to understand what an enterprise is like and why it's so hard for them to adopt these things. And these are some of those challenges that they have where, right, if this doesn't work, what's the critical path? My network isn't the same. My environment's not the same, right? I don't know, right? It's crazy in there, and it's not something you can just change on a dime. Change is slow in the enterprise, and it's for a good reason, because they need reliability as much as they need the flexibility of DevOps. So they're trying to figure out how to make those two work together, and it's challenging for them.
You just reminded me of a fairly recent customer meeting I went to. It was a really well-known high street brand, and I went in to just talk about automation, orchestration, and best practices type conversation. And what was really interesting was their last headcount they got in their team to build up their team, they used to hire a developer. So they have an entire development organization, but the infrastructure team got their own developer just to manage all of these things and to bring those development best practices in. And I was really impressed by this. And it was funny how halfway through the conversation, while I was talking through, you should start looking at these kind of concepts and these kind of concepts, which lead you into things like service templates. And suddenly the developer stopped looking at his laptop and looked up, and then all the infrastructure guys tuned out and started looking back. And the switch in the meeting was really amazing. This guy's just like, oh, this is all I wanted to hear about, is how can I use like service templates or something and just call them, and I can present those APIs much easier than every single infrastructure command. And all the other infrastructure guys were just like, I don't know what he just said. Like, that's what that guy's for. But it was great to see they're solving this problem, because they knew that was their weakness, was that they didn't have that type of thinking that could be the interface to all of the other teams that are doing deployments. And that's really cool to hear, and I hope we see more of that kind of thing, where when infrastructure teams, when NetOps teams actually start bringing in developers that can be that translator, that can come in with, it could be just a graduate who's got good fundamentals in programming, and then teach them infrastructure, then teach them how to present that infrastructure back to their type of people. Like I think that there's a lot to be said for their strategy there of bringing that developer into their NetOps org.
I have felt for a long time. I probably have a blog that I wrote in, I'm going to say 2007, 2008. That was basically talking about, yes, the infrastructure developer, right? Someone who is in that role, who knows how to code, who understands development, but is focused on the infrastructure. And I think that is like one of the best ideas, is to have that person right with you to do that, not just to bridge it, but to be able to, you know, help do these things, to establish the best practices, to bring them to understand, and just start, you know, I mean, showing other people how cool this is, right? Because it's awesome, right? I mean, this whole world is different, but yet it's the same. It's hard to describe, right? I mean, that's obviously, I'm a developer, but I love the networking side. There's so many different things that you can do. And it's security, you know, delivery, speeding things. What do you want to look at, right? It's all out there. You get to touch everything. It's a great feeling. So I like that approach, and I wish more people would take that, of looking for developers rather than network engineers, in order to help kind of, I guess that is one way to bridge those worlds and bring them together.
Create your own super NetOps person by coming from the other side. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Get them, bring them, tell them you have better cookies. I had dark side, better cookies.
You always have the best snacks.
That's right. Right.
The best snacks in the whole company.
There you go. Bring them over. Convince them.
Awesome. That is actually, we've already run out of time. I can't believe how quickly that went, Laurie. We're going to have you back, I hope, sometime soon to talk more about these types of things.
Sure. I'm always ready to complain about something. Or offer something, I'm sure.
Next time, have the cheese head. I'll load it up a little bit more as well, and
I'll bring my cheese head.
We'll see how that goes. So thanks very much for joining us, Laurie, and listeners. It'd be pretty rare to not have heard of Laurie Mac Vittie before. Google her. She's written 1 or 2 articles on these topics. By 1 or 2, I mean thousands. But yeah, thanks for listening. This has been REDtalks, Ranting Engineers on DevOps. You've been listening to Nathan Pierce, that one's me, and Laurie Mac Vittie from F5 Networks. Thanks for listening.